we're here today with Salvatore Vitale, and the Photography Salon we launched that because we currently have our gallery in East London closed. So the gallery is a collaboration between Crane, Kalman, Brighton at Motel. So hopefully we can all welcome you soon in the space, but for now, we're very happy to have Salvatore here. He's a visual artist, an educator, and an editor, and we're going to talk about his work today. Hi, Salvatore. How are you?
Hi there, I'm very good, thank you, and thanks for having me here. Thanks for the invitation, and welcome everybody.
You're actually our first speaker who's not based in the UK. So you're in Switzerland right now, right? Okay. So how's the current situation in Switzerland? How are you coping?
I would say that, in Switzerland now, we are not on lockdown anymore. So the measures are not so strict anymore. They reopened basically almost everything in the 11th. So we are kind of more free in a way, even though, of course, we need to take care of social distancing and all the security measures that are still ongoing. But the situation seems to be much better. Also, the number of deaths and contagious decreased quite a lot. And, well, it's kind of awkward because it seems like my impression is many people already forgot about the situation. But I think it's normal in a way.
Yeah. It's a little bit different in the UK. We're still very much stuck at home, but that also gives us the opportunity to talk to amazing artists like you. So I really want to talk about your body of work, How to Secure a Country. I find it a very fascinating project. Also because I'm Swiss myself. I was born and raised in Switzerland and lived there for 25 years. So it's quite special to see the angle that you took. And I'm very excited to look at your photos today and discuss the work in a little bit more detail with you. But maybe you can just give us a quick overview of what How to Secure a Country is about and how you approach this topic in the first place.
Well, How to Secure a Country is a visual research. This is how I like to call it. So to me, it's not a photography project in itself, but I see it more as a visual research. And this relates a lot with my way of approaching photography and art and my practice as a photographer and researcher in a way. And basically, it's a long-term body of work about the Swiss national security system. Everything started actually in 2014 when there was this votation against massive immigration in Switzerland. It was a federal popular initiative, so people were called to vote in favor or against it, which basically regulated in a more strict way the access of the free circulation. So the access of people from other countries getting the visa, etc., etc., etc. It was kind of a Brexit before Brexit. So it wasn't so popular worldwide as Brexit, but of course it was covered quite a lot also in international press. And the result of this votation was actually, it passed. And there was like a big influence by some cantons. Switzerland is a federation country. This is important to know. And also Switzerland is a semi-direct democracy system. So that means basically that people has real power to even change the constitution. So there are these federal popular initiatives that then affects the law directly. So it passed. And at that time, I used to live in the Italian part of Switzerland, in Ticino, Lugano. And that canton, Ticino, was one of the main in favor of this. So actually, from the very beginning, I really didn't have an idea on working on this kind of subject. It was, I just was feeling very bad because I was living in the country already for 10 years, more or less. I was considering myself to be very integrated I'm still not Swiss, but of course I live here for so long now that to me, I mean, it's my home, my everything.
Mm-hmm.
But that brought me to reflect a lot. And then I started to really think about my position in the country. And even if I really wanted to live in a country that ends up with this kind of epilogues. And then, you know, at the beginning, you always have this moment of madness somehow. And when this kind of started to go away, I tried to really understand why in 2014 at the time, we still lead to this kind of epilogues, why populism is rising so much. I mean, I started to ask some of the questions that many people actually are asking themselves even now. And my way to respond to this was like doing what I know how to do better, or at least I think so. And that was like starting a research in order to understand. But at that stage, still, I didn't have in mind to do a project. I was reading a lot about Swiss history. I was reading a lot about Swiss political systems, Swiss social system, just to understand better the place where I moved when I was 18, because I was feeling that there was something I needed to know. And while I was doing it, then I started to notice there's something that I knew unconsciously, but I started to notice it in a more conscious way, that everything was about security. It's important also to mention that at the time, it was the moment in which Europe was starting to experience the big migration waves and the big migration crisis. So, I mean, security was a very important issue I mean, of course, global context because of terrorism, etc., but also in Europe was like a very intense period at the moment. So at some point I started to think, well, I live in the so-called safest country in the world. And so to me, it was super interesting to show how the security system of this country works, to use it as a case study. So to me, it wasn't very much about Switzerland in itself, but was more like a perfect case study in order to show and explain how many security systems are developed and work in a global context. And that was basically the beginning of my 6 years almost path into the Swiss security system, basically.
Which, you know, I assume, or I just imagine, wasn't easy, because the Swiss security system, how would you first approach that? How did you get access to all? We will be looking at pictures in a minute, but how will you, you know, how did you get access to all of these places which, you know, usually remain hidden? How were you able to create that view from the inside?
Yeah, to me, one of the main questions at the beginning was, how do I approach it? Because it's a very big topic. And of course, it's made of a certain kind of complexity, not only in terms of access, but also in terms of understanding the system itself. You can imagine how complex a security system is and how many actors produce security in a country. So, I mean, the starting point to me was always research. So I was like trying to understand the system. And a second point where I really wanted to do like this without changing this point of view was to work from the inside. Working from the inside to me means I really didn't want to make like an investigation or something like that. But I really wanted to collaborate actively with the institutions that produce security in the country in order to show how security system works. And that was for me very important, because my work is not a sort of, I mean, it's not a denounce of the system. I'm not stating whether there is an exceed of security, whether the system is working or not, but to me it was more like a scientific approach in order to show why the security system in Switzerland, for instance, is so efficient, and what are the cornerstones that make it so efficient. And the first step to me was, I was lucky enough to start to collaborate with a scholar, Jonas Hagman. At that time, he was a researcher at the Center for Security Studies at the University of Zurich, at the ATH. And basically, I mean, of course, I wanted to got in touch with them because that is one of the main centers that produce data and researchers. Because the security system in Switzerland is so complex that they also collaborate with academies in order to study the system itself. So basically, thanks also to a grant that I won with Pro Helvetia, I managed to get in touch with Jonas Hagman. Jonas Hagman basically helped me a lot to understand the system. And from a collaboration that was meant to be like one meeting, he was explaining me some things. He really felt so engaged by the project that then we end up collaborating for 5 years almost. And that was very important for me. Also because the way I work, as I said, is very research-based. So for me, it's very important to work with people that can help me to achieve what I cannot achieve by myself. So this is one example of collaboration I had for the project, but then I can mention also many more. And basically what I did was starting to study the system, also in order to understand what do I want to say about it. And also what kind of institutions, both private and public institutions and companies I want to show, what doesn't make sense to show, in order to give a complete overview on what the security system is. And thanks to some researchers, also led by Jonas Hagman and others, and thanks to this kind of diving into the system, I understood more or less what I wanted to show. And then the next step was gaining access. Imagine, like, I'm a photographer, I'm not even Swiss. I was sending emails like, imagine, like, yeah, I'm an artist, never say you are a photographer. I'm an artist, and I would like to photograph what you're doing there. Can I come? I mean, it's much more difficult. First of all, because of course, for security reasons, sometimes they can let you access. But also because, of course, every time I was visiting any institution, I was becoming part of the security system itself, because they got the responsibility on myself. So, and this led to a lot of paperwork. This led also to the fact that these people, of course, are employed, and they need to invest time to be with me, because it's not that I can be alone around and do what I need to do. So you can imagine that the structure of it is quite complex. Yeah. And actually, I mean, it took almost 1 year for me to get the first access. And it was a very, very fortunate situation. Actually, I started from the border police, which to me was amazing, because the border police, together with the army, is the only federal institution in Switzerland, because all the rest is cantonal. And what happened is that they cover so many different tasks in the security game. So to me it was amazing to start with them. But actually the first access came because at some point Jonas Hagman found out that a former colleague of him became the chief of the border guards in Basel. And so basically I had suddenly a direct contact. So we contacted him and then he let me in. And that was my first real access with the system. So it didn't come without, you know, in a very institutional contact, but was more like really word of mouth.
Yeah.
And then of course, as soon as you access, then you have to be able to build trust about yourself. And then, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's easier to access other institutions. For some of them, for instance, I didn't manage in the end. But of course, I mean, when you present yourself and say, I'm doing this, I'm collaborating with the University of Zurich, I already worked with the border guard in Basel and Chiasso, and then, I mean, this helps a little bit.
Yeah, sure, because you've built that trust, which you can then, you know, rely back on. But you've mentioned collaboration, which I find in that aspect very interesting, because I assume that also brought a lot of restrictions with it, because it still is the Swiss security system, and even though you gained the access, so how did that all play out? How much did you feel restricted in a way, or how much did you get to a point where you felt like, okay, you need to play within that system in order to move forward?
Well, you know, I mean, I was aware of it since the beginning because, of course, it's always about compromise and negotiation. So to me, it was so important to do it from the inside that I was willing to give some, to get rid of some freedom.
Yeah.
So to me, I mean, on a scale of importance, like having access, working in collaboration with those institutions and people was more important than being able to photograph whatever I wanted. So basically, I mean, I also have to say that there are several layers. My work is multi-layered. So there are several layers. One layer, of course, is the visual layer. The project started mainly to be a photography research. Then it expanded in other formats. But of course, the photography part is still very relevant and is one layer. But then, of course, there are other layers that allow me to be more free and then I can say or present issues that probably or maybe I wouldn't be able to cover when I was, for instance, visiting these or the other institution. So to me, there was like a process of building up this multi-layer narrative that would allow me, of course, to cover everything I wanted to cover. So the photography part, of course, is the part where I had to make more compromises. But then the data visualization part, the way I use data, the installation part, like some of the parts that were not completely related with the collaboration to institutions, there I brought things that I couldn't photograph. So to me, it was like very much about also at the very beginning understanding how to set up the project, how to set up this research. And it took quite a long time to really understand what was the best solution in order to cover as much as possible.
Which I mean, I have your book, and which I think you did very well. I'm just gonna, because it's a little bit awkward to show it in the book, I'm just gonna share my screen very quick, and then we can have a better look of what exactly you've done in how to secure a country. The PDF is built up similar to the book. So you have these different security systems that you work through. Maybe I can just give a quick glimpse of what you've done. So you do have the photographic part, these very clean pictures, and then you have the data. Oh, that is the visual archive. You have these data visualizations, which we will all see a little bit better in a minute, and then you have your visual archive. So that is how the whole book is organized, from these, going through these different security systems. So we start with border and customs, and I'm just gonna click through and you can tell a little bit more what you're, maybe tell us a little bit, because as we can see, you have a very clean visual language. Oh yeah, we have a data visualization. That is part of the visual archive, which you also included. So what brought you, for example, with that instance, what brought you to present the pictures as they are?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main questions I had at the beginning was, because I knew this research would last several years at the beginning, I also knew more or less that I would visit so many different places. I would find several kind of conditions, also physical conditions. And I mean, imagine every time I was photographing something, I had like a very limited amount of time, sometimes even a very limited space I could place myself. And also I wasn't free to bring like any gear I needed or whatever. It was like very intuitive somehow. But then I decided to use a visual language that could help me to show. I mean, my work is not journalistic. My work is not an investigation, as I said. So I wasn't really interested in showing action, in showing people. For instance, I mean, there are very few portraits in the whole body work, I think 2 or 3. To me, it was more like creating an atmosphere with the visual material. So I always work in this sense. For me, the visual material is never like real documentation of facts, but it's more like a documentation of a situation. And my pictures, I mean, for my pictures, I wanted to have like this very clinical style, this very Swiss style. And also, I wanted to photograph the places where security happens. I wanted to photograph the places that they grant me access to. So to me, that was really a matter of kind of, I mean, I was photographing that is abstract and elusive in a way. A security system works as soon as it stays invisible. And invisibility is one of the key words in my artistic practice. So to me, it was more like rendering visible this invisibility and using like the language of the system in order to make it. So all this idea of protocols, procedures, etc., etc. And when it was about making the book, because the book was, I mean, to me, the book is just a part, is a work in the work. Then, of course, when I work with installation and exhibition, is different, etc., etc. When I was co-editing the book with Lars Willumait, I wanted to show the visual archives. And the visual archives basically are another layer of the research, because in a way, I'm the one who is showing the system by photographing, getting access, etc. But on the other end, I was asking myself how the system presents itself. So all that is called impression management, basically. So what is the image the system gives of itself? And it's quite complex because many things should stay invisible. So what is their way to visualize themselves? And then I decided to work with archives. And then to me, it was important to kind of, in the book, to give a structure to the book, because it was a lot of discussion on how to structure this visual research into a book. Because also there is an important text part, for instance, etc., etc. So to me, that was very important to separate what is my vision of the system, so the vision I'm presenting, and what is the impression management part. And that's why the archives are presented in a different way in the book. So with this black and white duotone, basically, technique. They are all edited. Many of these archives come from video screenshots, because of course I used a lot the army archive in Switzerland. The Swiss army has a department which is called Mediatek, where they produce a lot of material for the population and also for PR, etc., etc. So I've been working a lot with this archive, and then to me it was important to make it clear what is my vision, what comes from the archive. The reason for the red actually is something that we discussed a lot also with Offshore Studio, who is the studio that designed the book and designed also the data visualization. We made so many tries. In the end, we decided to go for a red, because of course it's a color that, again, is another layer of meaning. It's a color that somehow reflects many aspects. So, well, very simplistic, the Swiss flag is red, but also red is a color that often is linked with security, but also red is a color that, for instance, is used a lot in the communication of right-wing parties, where they claim a need for security. So there are several layers that red kind of covers, and to me that was interesting in order to build up a new vision, of these visual archives by working with them. Also because if you look at the book is very regular in the sense that my picture, for instance, come always on the same size, because to me it's not about the single picture. So the narrative inside the book is made by those clusters. And also the edit of the book doesn't really come with this visual narrative, but it's more like I don't have a real hierarchy on the images, and I didn't want to have a real hierarchy of the images. But the part with the visual archives is more free, so there are several sizes, several formats. So to me, there was also giving the book a sort of dynamic sense by playing with different elements.
Which I think you did very well. I mean, I really feel it works. And it's just so interesting to kind of, being brought up in Switzerland and being around these systems all the time and being influenced by them, but not really, you know, having a full understanding of them. And I feel like your work really creates that insight and showing the system for the inside. So what I'm wondering is, has that, you know, after this whole this long visual research and this collaboration with these different systems, has it changed your perception of Switzerland? And
Well,
how has it influenced it?
that's a very interesting question, because of course, I mean, my perception changed, definitely. But at the same time, many things that I've been witnessing are things that I could already imagine. I mean, the thing is that I'm an Italian living in Switzerland, and so my look or my view on the country is very different than from the same view by a Swiss person. That makes a big difference. I mean, to me, of course, the security system, if you ask me, is it efficient as it is sold? Definitely it is. And this comes by the fact that it's highly organized. So all these protocols, all these procedures, all this simulation and dissimulation they make, of course, make the system very efficient. I mean, I can take as an example, just also to connect with what is our actual situation with the pandemic. So basically, when I was working on the project, I was studying all these protocols, and I was studying also these studies and simulation they were making in order to, because I mean, you know, there is Switzerland, as many countries has it, but they define risks. So there are like 3 main categories of risk: natural, technological, and social risk. And then for each category, they define the possible threats. And one of them, of course, is pandemic. And pandemic is a social risk in this scale. And they made a study and a simulation of what would happen in case of a pandemic. They published it in 2005, if I'm correct, 2004 or 2005. And it was, to me, that was super interesting now to see basically when the government was making announcement about the measures that they were taking because of the pandemic, I kind of could, you know, in a way, imagine already what they were going to do or say, because of course I was aware because of this pandemic. And I have to admit that the simulation they made is quite close even to what happened in reality. So there is a big effort in risk management, a risk assessment. And this is something that makes the system quite efficient, because of course they are kind of prepared. Then of course the reality is very different from a simulation or a study. But I have to say that everyone working in the security complex is very aware on what these procedures are. And the system is very efficient because it's like a chain. So everyone at each level knows exactly what happens before and afterwards. So this actually facilitates the way they can react also quickly to situation. Another example that I'm bringing in the project, but in a more abstract way, is the Swiss Army. The Swiss Army, like, not so many people know that Switzerland, even though it's a neutral country, the military, I mean, it's still mandatory. So people has to go to be soldier for 2 weeks a year, more or less. I'm simplifying it because I don't want to really go deep into how it works, but it's still mandatory. And the whole Swiss army is based on what is called militia, which means that it's not a professional army. So those people basically they have their regular life, and then they go, they train. But this happens because in case of war, they also bring their guns at home. And this is why, for instance, Switzerland is one of the most armed countries in the world. I mean, of course, it's very different situation related to the States and Yemen, that are the first two. But of course, I mean, this happens because the army should be ready in case of war or in case of attack. So everyone from their home can be ready to go and defend the country. Of course, the concept of militarization then is very different nowadays. starting from the 70s, more or less, it started to shift
Mm-hmm.
from pure militarization of the country, so the army, the infrastructure related to the army, to something that is more like diplomatic mission, so peacemaking and international relations. And this is a policy that Switzerland is still developing, and is still like it's very important in the security security policies. I also bring this in the project because, for instance, what I wanted to show when it was about the army, I wasn't really interested in showing tanks or guns or stuff like that. But to me, it was more interesting to show, for instance, this image that we are showing now is a training camp. And this also is connected with the use of this military infrastructure. That then, for instance, in this training camp, they use it also to train robots. So collaboration between academy and the army, for instance, etc., etc. But also I wanted to show this diplomatic side of security policies and security making. And so, for instance, in the project, there is a part which is the military protocol. And I've been photographing like one of the highest ceremonies of this military protocol, where a chief of one army comes and meet the chief of the Swiss army, for instance. So to me, it was like this, I mean, but without a clear understanding of the system, I could never be able to understand what to show, how to show it, and where to focus on.
We actually have a question to exact this picture, and I forgot to say that in the beginning, but I encourage you all to ask your questions and just post it in the chat, and then you can, Salvatore, we hopefully have time to all, or to you have hopefully time to all answer them. So someone asked if this picture was taken in Switzerland, which I assume it was, and if yes, where was it taken?
Yeah, all the pictures in the work are taken in Switzerland. This one in particular is a military training camp close to Solothurn, or Soletta in Italian. I mean, here in Switzerland, of course, we have officially four national languages, so it depends on the language. Solothurn is in German. But yeah, it's taken there, and this is like one of the biggest infrastructure. Basically, in this training camp, they use it to perform any kind of possible scenario. So they are used also to produce these visuals I was talking about, but also to train soldiers in case of whatever kind of possible situation. So gases, they can float it completely, they can simulate explosions, etc., etc. To me, that was also interesting, as I was saying, because of course, one part of my research led to the modern security, let's call it like this. And so I was interested also in understanding, for instance, how robotics, how machine vision is playing a role into security system. And so, for instance, I soon find out that there are collaboration between the army and some academies where they use this field in order to train robots. Because, of course, a very important part of robotics is training these machines or testing these machines. And so with these military facilities, they are able to test them in any kind of condition. So from I mean, it's also important and useful to know that after Fukushima disaster in Japan, a lot of the robotic research shift to basically security and seek and rescue missions, because everyone, like globally, we started to think about, okay, why we should risk human life if we can send robots. And so, for instance, this is happening now in Fukushima. There is a big project where robots are cleaning up basically the radioactivity in the power plant. And so, since a lot of the research shift in that kind of policies, Switzerland became one of the leading countries in research in this kind of field. So, for instance, there is the ETH, so the University of Zurich, the Polytechnical University, who is very advanced in robotic research. And research in robotics is not, of course, only to be defined as building up a machine. So what you see is a machine in the end, but it's also based on, for instance, robotic vision. I was very interested in robotic vision. So our robots and drones, usually, UAV we tend not to consider them as a robot, but actually they are in the same field. And for instance, how, for instance, this kind of algorithm work in order that a drone, for instance, can collaborate with other drones. So all these mechanisms of flying machine that work together in order to, for instance, rescue someone who is trapped in a power plant or in the mountains. Or it was interesting, I've been witnessing experiments of robots, drones creating like bridges working together. Or if we stay in the vision for robotics, for instance, how a flying machine or a robot can map the space and can make its way through the space without necessarily a human intervention, or without having data already regressed into the system. So all of this, of course, you can imagine, is also hard to photograph. So to me, that was very important to show it also in this multi-layer narrative. And for instance, some pictures that you showed show, like the previous one, for instance, shows a robot in one of this one shows this robot in one of this military training camp. It was in a bunker, and they were testing, for instance, this ability of the robot to self-generate a vision of the space. Because the vision of the space, of course, it's needed for the robot in order to go in and not to get stuck somewhere, etc., etc. But also, sometimes you don't have a precise idea on what up. Like imagine like an explosion in a power plant. You don't know what happened inside until you enter. So robots can give you this kind of information, and then can help also the ones that are outside to understand what is the better strategy in order to intervene, etc., etc. So, as you can imagine, security system is not made only by police, army, etc., but there is much more. And technology, of course, plays a big role in that, especially nowadays, especially in modernity.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating listening to you, because you obviously have this extensive knowledge. And I just want to quickly come back to how you presented that then. We know how you presented it in the book. But how you presented that in an exhibition, how did you engage the audience with these very complex structures? So could you just tell us through some of these installation views and why you chose a rather unusual approach to presenting pictures, or like what you added?
Well, to me, as I said at the beginning, presenting the work is not just showing images. So to me, presenting the work is another layer where I can create an extra sense on what the work is. So to me, it's not just making an exhibition, but it's more like understanding how can I play with all the elements that I have in order to make sense out of them, and to add layers as well. So I usually work site-specific, both if I work together with a curator or if I curate myself. I don't like to curate myself, my shows. Because I mean, to me, collaboration is one of the main resources I can get. And I love collaborating with other people, because to me, that is a way to enhance even what I'm able to say. So, when I approach, for instance, exhibition making, I like to work site-specific. I like to work in an installative way. And every time the exhibition reflects both the cornerstones of the work, but also help me to add extra layers. So in this case, for instance, the picture you're showing, this is an installation I made in China. In China was very interesting to work with this project. It was massively censored, for instance. So what you see here is what was left, but actually a big part of the show was censored. But that was a super interesting experience for me. So basically what you see here, I mean, I had this rounded room, and to me, the shape of the room was already super interesting, because I mean, it's not that happens very often to work with this kind of shape. And then I was like, I couldn't really show the totality of the project in the space because it wasn't big enough. And also for my work, in many cases, I would need MoMA, but I mean, it's not going to happen. So, you know, it's
Not
very
yet.
important for me. It's very important for me to really understand how to work with the space I have and what can I show in order for it to have still a sense. So what I did here, for instance, was I really like this idea of having a central element that reflects on the circularity of this room, and then I mimic basically a structure that represents basically a panopticon, which is, of course, probably many of you knows what panopticon is. It's a structure. It was also highly theorized by Foucault. It's a structure basically that was used in order to build up jails, basically like prisons, where there is like a central tower and the prison is built all around, so that basically one person can have a look, can survey all the structure, even though the structure is very big. So my idea was to create this with LADs, also appropriating of a language that is common in the Swiss security system, or in the general in the security system, but also in the country where I was working. So in China, LAD, scrolling LED is massively used, for instance, for communication purposes or advertisement, etc. Reappropriating of this language, I made this installation where in the center, basically you see keywords or tags or keywords referring to the topics I'm covering. I need to be very careful because I wasn't free to write whatever I wanted, otherwise also that would have been censored. So here I was building up this, I was very influenced by the fear of censorship. And basically, there is an audio installation. You can see it a little bit with the speakers there in the center, double channel, where there is a voice basically naming all the institutions that produce security in Switzerland. So coming from my research and Jonas Sackmann research. And then basically all around you see some images from the project. And I tried to give an overview on some of the central points of the project so that you can't see everything, but you can get a sense of it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I think 50% of the pictures were censored. So what you could see was like very little, but I'm very happy. I mean, I think that it made a lot of sense for me also being censored, because of course I'm presenting a project about state security and then I get censored in a country that is not even Switzerland. And also they changed the name of the project into Autosecure Switzerland because so it's very specific on the country. But the interesting thing is also that I won a prize for that exhibition. So that was like, to me, it was amazing. Like, yeah, and I got Chinese money because it was a public prize. So that was amazing to me. Like, wow, you do it, but then you get the prize on the show. And it was like, I love when this kind of things happen.
So interesting how it all plays out. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and then of course going on with censorship, and maybe this is something we will say later, but at some point, of course, I got interviewed because I won this prize by Tencent, which is basically one of the main social media channels in China, which is basically, Tencent is a magazine, is a company that owns, for instance, WeChat, which is the main messaging application in China. Everyone uses WeChat for everything, also to pay. So I was asked for an interview, and they told me in the first email, yeah, we have 600 million readers. I was like, wow, cool, fine. And my next project actually is going to happen in China. So I was so afraid. I mean, for the first and only time in my life, I didn't feel free to reply to the question as I wanted to reply. And I have to admit it. I was very diplomatic in replying because they were asking me stuff like, oh, if you would do something like this in China, what would you cover? You know, so that was, maybe it's my paranoia in a way. I'm not saying that definitely they won't grant me access to the country if I say something. But of course, for the first time, I really was paying very much attention on what I was saying. And it wasn't a written interview that I could think about it. It was a spoken interview. So it was super stressful for me. But in the end, it was. Yeah.
I'm sure you handled that situation really well. But yeah, it does sound does sound difficult to be in, but it does. It's so interesting how that again is then a comment on the whole work that you've made. So what I was just quickly want to show is how you presented it in Switzerland, because then you also used a completely different approach. You use these structures to present the pictures. So could you just quickly say something about that?
Switzerland actually, that was amazing because I knew I would have the show 2 years before finishing the project. So it was a very amazing situation. It wasn't a commission, of course, but it was like a privileged situation where I knew that the work would be presented already when I was finished. So I had a deadline, which is very important to have when you work on this long-term research, because you can easily get lost.
Yeah.
And so I was very grateful to Photostiftung Schweiz that approached me and said, okay, we want to present the project. And they gave me almost basically blank paper on how to do it. So I brought in Lars Willumait. We were working already on the project together. We were collaborating. Lars Willumait, for the ones who doesn't know him and go, I highly suggest you to check his work. He's an amazing curator and social anthropologist. He's German, but he's also based in Switzerland for many years. And he was the perfect person for me to work with because he can understand very deeply what I'm talking about. And also in the end, our collaboration ended up to become, he was not just the curator of my show, but he also brought content into the show. So when we were discussing how to present this multi-layered project, and also finally I had a very big space, a museum space, quite big, then we decided, I mean, first of all, as I said also before, I really like to work to reappropriate of languages. So basically, we decided to bring into the exhibition space elements that are part of the security system. So for instance, working with this signage style and the metal that is used in the security system, and also even the screws of the structure that holds the picture are the screws that are used in official signage in Switzerland. So every little details and element is a reappropriation of the language of the Swiss security system. And also what I meant when I was visiting all these places. And so we designed together with, I mean, there is another person I worked with, Federico Rella. We designed the structures that could host the picture. And these structures in the space create like this, what Lars calls forest of signs. We like this idea of having this complexity and this forest of signs. And the idea was, to me, actually it was the second time or third time in history that the space, this museum space, was used as an open space. So we got rid of all the walls. We left it completely open.
Yeah.
This was a big logistic effort, and I'm so thankful to the museum that allowed me to do that. But basically, we decided I want people to enter the space and feel overwhelmed. That's why the space is overcrowded. The structures are quite big. There are 3 different sizes, but it's overcrowded. I mean, there are 54 structures with prints. Because to me, it was like, you enter the space and I want you to feel overwhelmed by something that you experience every day, but usually is invisible. So for the first time, I want you to face it. It's like, listen, it's everywhere. So I was playing a lot on the audience experience, in the sense, I also wanted this physical experience with the images. So you really had to go, like, it was very physical, because the structure, the ice one, like this one on the left, it's 1.80 meters high. So it's very physical, you know, and I really wanted people to experience. And also the path inside the space is there are obstacles. So sometimes you really have to go through the image. It's not linear, it's not bidimensional at all. You can even see at some point the back of the structure, so it's quite, and then
so the audience needed to navigate through it.
Exactly.
In a way, yeah.
And also, I wanted to switch. Usually, in the museum, for instance, the walls are the noble space of the museum for the images, for the photography. Yeah. And I switched these roles. So the structures are on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
the photography is on the floor, and on the wall there is the data visualization, because to me data visualization has exactly the same importance as my photography work. And so to me there was also like a statement in a way. So the wall is for data, the floor is for images. And then in the exhibition space, there were also research tables where people could freely access to my research. There was also a sound installation, a video installation, etc., etc. Because, as I said, I work with this multi-layer narrative. And to me, there was a lot about creating a balance between the visual effect and so the artistic, of course, approach, because I'm an artist, I'm not a scientist. But at the same time, the scientific meaning of what I present. So the data that are part of the work and were presented are actual data that are used or can be used in an academic discourse. So some people, for instance, were entering the exhibition and were spending 3-4 hours inside doing research themselves. So that for me was the main goal. And I always like to work. I mean, I like when my audience is proactive. I always call my audience to be active and not passive. Because to me, it's more like I give you tools and then you are free to interpret or create your own awareness on the topic.
Yeah.
So I really like to work in
Engage with it. Yeah. I have to be a little bit more aware of time. So unfortunately, we can't go through it all. I just quickly want to encourage you all to have a look at Salvatore's website, and that is his newest work, Retreat, Restless Landscape. Go on his website. It's in itself an artwork, I find. And it does show, it mirrors these complexities that you engage with in your project. So please do that. And just quickly, what are your plans for the future?
Well, actually, I mean, of course, when I talk about long-term research, it doesn't mean that, to me, it's always like, it's not that I close a project, I start another one. To me, it's like, for instance, exploring the security system of Switzerland for almost 6 years meant to have many open questions that I couldn't develop or explore while I was working on this. So to me, I'm very interested in exploring them, and there are many on the back of my mind. And basically, I mean, I was starting, because the work, of course, when you look, I mean, imagine, I started in 2014 and I ended, if I can say ended, because for instance, Retreat Restless Landscape is kind of starting from this research, but taking another route and path. But I was very interested towards the end about the role of technology in shaping the security system. But then I was thinking, okay, but how does it shape society and modern societies? So not specifically only the security system itself. And this is what I'm working on right now. Of course, it's a huge, broad topic. And I'm kind of course, I mean, I had to narrow it down and see what I'm interested in. And basically the first step is something that I already started to work with, but coronavirus didn't happen. Because I'm very interested in the hyper technological development. So how it happens, what is the role of technology, and how technology is represented or presented in order to also foster social control. So this is happening a lot now during the corona crisis, with all this discourse around tech giants trying to foster an idea of a society that is totally techno-regulated. Mm-hmm. Or the questions around the debate around tracking apps. So or all the discourse around big data and the use of big data, etc., etc., etc. Of course, I mean, I can't explore all of this in one project, it's impossible. But to me, it was more like, okay, I'm very interested in Asia for several reasons. First of all, especially China. First of all, because technological development there was very massive. Mm-hmm. Massive and fast. So, and this is why I was saying that I was very afraid of that interview, because I'm supposed to work in China. And I already knew at that time. So, jokes apart, I'm very interested in China because the technological development there happened in the last basically 20 years, super fast. And also their idea, and not only China, but Asia in general, their idea of technology is very different of our perception, Western perception of technology. So basically what I'm doing there now on a first stage, I'm using technology to work on my project. And this is also refers to the multi-layered approach. I'm not stuck to photography then necessarily, but I use several languages depending on what it makes sense for me to use for what I'm saying. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm working about this impression management again, but more refer to what I define or is defined technological propaganda in the context of technoscience. So that means understanding how technology is promoted and how this affects the idea we have of technology and how this becomes part of everyday life and how we as citizens deal with it. So I'm going to work with artificial intelligence and generative storytelling. It's going to be a photography / video, a movie basically project that then will be extended afterwards into Japan and Norway because I want to keep also the Western side.
That sounds like exciting things to come. So I'm just going to quickly share your Instagram handle, your website, and your email. If you have any more questions for Salvatore, do not hesitate to contact him. We're already, this hour went by so fast. We're already at the end. Everybody in the UK needs to get ready to clap for the NHS now. That's what we do every Thursday. I'm just going to quickly introduce our next guest for the Photography Salon. So in 2 weeks' time, on the 4th of June, Richard Kalman will be speaking with the Italian photographer Giacomo Brunelli, whose unusual and unique style of street photography has brought him international attention, and the release of his 4th publication, this time documenting the streets of New York. So make sure to be here for that one. And thank you so much, Salvatore, for the insight in your rigorous visual research. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did, or still am. And everybody have a good evening and take care, stay healthy. Salvatore, I speak to you soon. Take care.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks everybody who was here. I see Max wrote in the chat. Hi Max, I hope we will manage to meet soon again. And I wish you all to be safe and healthy in this very interesting but hard time.